Hello. We're waking up in a dangerous new moment in the Middle East. Iran has directly attacked Israel for the first time. American and UK jets have been part of the defence. Sirens over Jerusalem. More than 300 drones and missiles launched by Iran. A moment of new danger after months of conflict in Gaza. Israel, with American and allied help, shot most of them down to limit the damage. President Biden in the Situation Room, promising unyielding US support. But there have been celebrations on the streets in Iran. Tensions between the two countries are nothing new, but it's the first time Iran has attacked its enemy directly. This matters. So this morning, we'll ask what happens now. So what have British planes been doing in skies overnight? Cabinet Minister Victoria Atkins is here. Labour's Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, joins us too. The BBC's international editor, Jeremy Bowen, will help us understand what's going on. And with the local elections looming, Carla Denyer is here for the Green Party. Morning. Welcome to the programme, and welcome also to my trio at the desk with me for the duration. Ian Duncan-Smith, former Conservative leader, Bronwyn Maddox, foreign policy expert and boss of the think tank Chatham House, and long-time Labour backer and multi-million selling author John O'Farrell. A warm welcome to all three of you. Now, let's begin with last night's attacks, which took place too late for the first editions of the newspapers. So I want to show you straight away what has been going on. More than 300 drones were launched late last night from Iran, taking hours to reach the distance to Israel. Overnight then in Jerusalem, you could hear the sirens wailing, but air defence systems shot down the vast majority of objects over the city. Let's go straight to Israel. My colleague Lise Doucette is there on the ground for us this morning. Lise, what happened last night?
Well, Laura, this time here and across the region, in fact, all the way to London, it was a nervous wait and watch to see how and when Iran would respond. And so it did in the early hours of the morning here. There were air raid sirens sounding across Jerusalem and indeed across Israel. And we could see explosions erupting in the sky as Israel's prized air defense system, the Iron Dome, intercepted the drones and missiles, a swarm of 300 projectiles that Iran launched from its territory into Israel. Israel says this morning that 99% of them were shot down by Israel, by the United Kingdom, by the US, by France, and also by Jordan, neighboring Jordan, which said it also responded by shooting down, intercepting the drones which crossed its territory, heading here to Jerusalem. And it said it had to do that to protect its territory. Late last night, Iran said its retaliatory strike was over and it wanted to draw a line under it. But this morning, Israel says the confrontation is not over and it's still on full alert.
It's interesting, Lise, you say there that the Israelis have said that the UK was involved in shooting down some of these projectiles. We haven't had that confirmation yet from the Ministry of Defence here. We'll talk to a cabinet minister in just a couple of minutes' time. But I just wonder, what is the atmosphere like in Israel this morning after that terrible night?
It's calm. Last night it was announced that schools would be shut. All educational activities are also ended. There will be no gatherings of more than 1,000 people. Israel is heading towards the Passover holidays, so classes were already going to close. This is a country where people prepare for war. There's a system of air raid shelters. There's a home front app that tells people what they can do. It's also a country where people have great confidence in their armed forces. So, of course, they are a bit on edge. Many people are said to be staying at home. I can see that there's a very popular mall. There are less people going to it. But for the people of Israel, like for people across this region, they know this is a moment fraught with risk and that a new chapter is being written in an all too turbulent region.
Thank you, Lise. It's great to speak to you there on the ground in Jerusalem for us. Well, these attacks are a step it was hoped that Iran would not take. The regime has long been an enemy of Israel and, of course, a backer of Hamas, considered a terror group by many governments around the world, the organisation that was behind the terrible assault on Israel on October the 7th. Tensions have been building during the months and months of Israeli bombardment of Gaza, as the US and other allies of Israel have grown increasingly worried about how Israel is fighting the war. Israel is thought to have been behind an attack on the Iranian embassy in Syria. Since then, there have been fears of revenge. President Biden warning Iran not to strike.
Mr. President, to Iran in this moment.
Don't.
But late last night, the attacks began. Hundreds of drones and missiles in the sky. American and allies jets helping Israel take them out. UK planes have been in the air over Iraq and Syria with the authority to shoot drones down. Last night, Rishi Sunak said he condemned the attacks in the strongest terms, saying Iran has once again demonstrated its intent on sowing chaos in its own backyard. The UK will continue to stand up for Israel's security. Well, we're together this morning on a very sober moment, but a really important one. Bronwyn, if you're a stranger to all of these complicated patterns and jigsaws of the Middle East, how can you explain what's going on here really simply for our audience?
It's a big step into more seriousness, more danger, if you like, in that Iran has for the first time attacked or tried to attack Israel directly. It's been causing, as your report was saying, all kinds of destabilization in the region, supporting Hamas, who carried out the October 7th attack, supporting Hezbollah up the north, supporting the Houthis, who are attacking the Red Sea from one side. We've just put out a podcast saying Iran's got involved in Sudan on the other side of the Red Sea with a threat there. So it is causing all kinds of trouble and enjoying the strain on Israel's international reputation that has followed the conflict in Gaza. But it does have half a point here in that Israel had attacked Iran's embassy in Syria, which is treated under international law as a piece of your own soil. And that's what they're saying. You attacked our soil, happened to be in Syria. We're going to retaliate, and we're prepared to stop here. But the question is what Israel now does.
Ian, do you think this attack was inevitable in a sense?
Yeah, I do think it was inevitable. The reason why the Israelis attacked the consulate as they did is because it was being used as a planning centre for Hezbollah, Hamas, and also the work of the Houthi. So all of this were the reasons they went. But as soon as they did that, as one was just said, it was almost certainly going to have a response from them. The response is interesting because it involved quite a number of other nations involved in this as well. I think Jordan's, because it was overflying Jordan, is the reason why they shot those down. But it was quite coordinated. It wasn't a sort of, we don't want to harm anybody gesture. They fired their big ballistic missiles at Israel as well, which were hit by the Iron Dome. So it was a substantial attack in response. What happens next is now up to the participants.
And John, you're a long-time supporter of the Labour Party. The UK is now involved in this too. We don't know exactly what UK planes were doing, but we know they were over the skies of Iraq and Syria. How do you think Labour should respond to this?
Well, those planes are often over Iraq and Syria, but for British armed forces to get involved in this conflict is a big step, it seems to me, and it feels like something that Parliament should be discussing rather than just an executive decision taking it Downing Street, or maybe that didn't even happen. This is a terrifying situation. This is a war with very many moral ambiguities. And the idea that Britain jumps straight into Israel's side on this will not sit comfortably with many people in the Labour Party and many people across the country, I think. OK,
perhaps also some people watching at home. All three of you, thank you very much indeed for now. We'll be back with you a bit later. And Jeremy Bowen will also join us in the programme to help us understand not just what's going on, but, as Bronwyn was suggesting, what might happen next. As we've been discussing, the UK is playing a part in this, whether you like it or not. We can show you the live pictures of Jerusalem, where we were just talking to Lise. And also we can see what has been happening in Tel Aviv this morning, where Israelis right across the country are grappling with a new fact that after months of conflict, Iran has carried out for the first time a direct attack on their new soil. That is different, despite the fact the two countries have been rivals and enemies for many, many years. As we've been saying, the Israeli air defences appear to have foiled the vast majority of missiles and drones that included support in the skies over Iraq and Syria from the UK. Let's, if we can, find out more about the British role in all of this. Welcome to the studio, Victoria Atkins, the Secretary of State for Health. I know this is a very sensitive situation, but what can you tell us about the UK's involvement in this? We know our planes were in the skies over Iraq and Syria. As you understand it, did they shoot anything down?
Well, this was an incredibly significant attack on Israel, and what I'm able to say at the moment, I hope viewers at home will understand, it's a live military situation. I am limited in what I can say at this point, and there will be updates through the day, but I can confirm that British planes were sent to the region as part of our what's called Operation Shader. That's our anti-Daesh initiative over Iraq and Syria. I'm not in a position at the moment to confirm or deny whether they took part in any of the activity you've just described, but more planes were sent to the region, and I'm told that they will intercept airborne missiles if they threaten the existing missions that the UK already undertaking in the region. But that does not, I'm just being very careful here, it doesn't necessarily mean that happened last night.
But does it mean that if there were more attacks like this, more Iranian drones being sent over to that part of the world with the aim of attacking Israel, they may shoot them down if there is another attack like this? So
the United Kingdom, along with our international allies, are very, very focused on de-escalating this. We do not want this to go further. We all understand how difficult and sensitive it is in the region at the moment. And so all of our diplomatic efforts are in that vein. In terms of the jets or the resources that are in the region, they will protect existing missions, but that is as far as I can go.
And in terms, though, of the decision to be involved in this, can you shed any light on how this came about? Was this a request from Israel? Was this a product of discussions with the White House? Can you shed any light on why UK jets were given this authorisation?
So in terms of the decision-making process, again, I'm afraid I can't give a running commentary at this stage, and there will be further updates in due course. But the Prime Minister held a COBRA meeting on Friday. He had updates throughout the day and indeed during the night yesterday and last night, and has been on calls this morning. We also are anticipating that a G7 leaders call will be scheduled, and of course the Prime Minister will be at that.
And was the Cabinet consulted before this decision was taken?
Again, I cannot, I'm afraid at this stage, give a running commentary on the decision.
That's not a running commentary though, you've told us there was a COBRA meeting, that's the government's emergency committee. So there were a number of people, probably quite a lot of people in Whitehall would have been involved in a process like that. Was the British Cabinet consulted before this decision was taken? So
with COBRA meetings, of course, there are relevant Cabinet ministers in that meeting. You will appreciate the circle of knowledge on this has to be very, very tight because of the sensitivities and the danger that is involved for everyone in the region. And so I've given you as much as I can, Laura, and I very much hope you'll understand in the circumstances.
Well, and of course, if there's an update while we're on air this morning, we will let viewers if we have additional information. In terms of what happens next, what would your message be to Israel now?
Well, the Foreign Secretary met his Iranian counterpart on Thursday to deliver the message very directly that Iran must not escalate matters in the region. We will continue.
Listen.
We will continue with that message. We want this to be contained. What we want is an immediate humanitarian pause in the region so that we can get the hostages out that are still held captive, the Israeli hostages, victims of that horrific attack in October. We want to get humanitarian aid into the region as well. But we also have to look to the future, and so our approach has very much been about ensuring that the government of Palestine is in a position to really strengthen the two-state solution. Hamas cannot be part of that.
But forgive me, Secretary of State.
That's the very long-term vision.
You mentioned that David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, told the Iranians last week not to go ahead with an attack. They went ahead with an attack. For many months, the UK and increasingly also the US has been saying to Israel on the other side, you must be much more careful in the prosecution of their war in Gaza. There's not much evidence that they have been listening. So why do you think now the UK and the US might be able to persuade Iran and Israel not to take this further?
Because it's not just the US and the UK, of course. We have a range of free democracies who stand alongside Israel, which is, you know, the single democracy in that region, and we very much want to protect the freedoms that gives to the people of Israel. But we also want to work with the international community to ensure that tensions do not rise further than they already have done. Of course, we acknowledge the difference that the last 12 hours has made, but we are absolutely focused on containing this.
And in the difference that the last 12 hours has made, how would you describe that difference? I mean, do you worry that this is a dangerous new chapter?
This is, as has already been described in your programme, this is a significant attack on Israel. And we, you know, I think everybody recognises that. That is why the President has indicated he wishes to hold a G7 leaders call. This is why we have taken this step of sending UK jets to the region as part of our existing missions there. But I don't think anyone can resolve from the fact that this is a significant attack, and what we want to try and do now is to de-escalate and to contain it.
Is it time though then, as many of your colleagues have wanted the government to do for a long time, to prescribe the Iranian Revolutionary Guard? In other words, change the law to say that is a terrorist organisation and should be treated as such?
So the Foreign Secretary dealt with this weekend. Of course, we keep all of these issues under constant review.
But under review means we might not.
Yeah.
For a long time, some of your colleagues have been saying you must actually call out Iran much more firmly and say that the Revolutionary Guard is a terrorist organisation and treat them as such. So
as the Foreign Secretary explained this weekend, there are two reasons why we have not taken that decision thus far. Firstly, we believe that the police, the security services and the courts here in the UK have the powers that they need to target those people who are causing the most concern, and indeed we have sanctioned some 400 individuals and entities from Iran here in the UK. But secondly, there is a point of the value of being able to have a direct conversation with the Iranian authorities in the way that has already happened. There is a value in that, to be able to land those messages directly with Iran. And so those are two of the factors that have been borne in mind as part of this.
So you haven't made your mind up yet?
That's not fair, because we have to, you know, this is a very fast-moving situation, as I say. All of these prescription conversations are always kept under review, and indeed when we've talked about other organisations in the past, there is something also about, you know, we have to be careful about how this is communicated and so on. But it is very much kept under review, and we are very alive to the last 12 hours.
Given what's happened, not just in the last 12 hours, but in the last few weeks, isn't it actually time to increase defence spending? You know, the government's target is to get to 2.5% of the GDP, the sum of everything that we produce in the economy. The Defence Secretary himself is understood to want it to be 3%. Given what's going on, actually, isn't it just time to say to people, yes, we must do this, and that might mean spending being taken away from other places, or it might mean new taxes or whatever. Isn't it actually time just to do that and be straight with people about the extent of the threats we face?
We absolutely understand the emerging international situation. This is why we've had the integrated defence review. We've also, in fairness, we have raised and continue to raise defence spending. We're now at about 2.3%.
But not to the level that many people believe is required with the world as it is in 2024.
And it's right also that within NATO, we are an incredibly significant player within NATO. I think we spend, our total spending on defence is equivalent to the spending of some 20 other NATO members, just to put it into perspective. So, you know, defence will always be our priority. And as we have already continued to invest in defence, of course that will continue. And the Chancellor has set out his ambitions to do so. But we need to bring it back to what we can do today and over the following days and weeks. We have an amazing armed forces. I'm very lucky to represent RAF Kuenssberg, and I'm very conscious of the toll that takes on both the pilots and their families when missions happen overseas. But our investment and our commitment to the defence community and to ensuring that our country is defended is absolutely paramount. And of course, we will always look to keep that under review.
I just briefly want to ask you about something that's coming up this week. Legislation, draft laws will be in Parliament this week to progressively over time ban the sale of cigarettes. As a Conservative, why is it up to you to tell people what to do? Aren't you meant to be a party that's is like freedom? You know, some of your colleagues aren't very happy about it, and the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, says it's nuts.
Well, as Health Secretary, obviously I'm responsible for looking after not just our health and the NHS, but also I have to look to the future. And we know that smoking causes 1 in 4 cancer deaths. It's responsible for 80,000 deaths a year across the United Kingdom. And pretty much every minute of every single day, someone will be admitted to hospital with a smoking-related condition. Now, every smoker I've ever spoken to in their adult years wishes they hadn't taken it up. And we know that the majority of smokers start smoking before the age of 20. So what we're trying to do is to say young people, children aged 14 or 15 this year, will not be able to buy cigarettes from shops. That doesn't mean that if you're an adult watching this programme today and you already smoke, we're not stopping you from buying them. We just want to stop our children from buying them. And protecting children, I think, is a very, very Conservative value. Looking out for future generations is a very Conservative value. And just as with the economy, we appreciate that a strong economy helps pay for the NHS, we also know a strong NHS helps a growing economy. And this is part of ensuring that we reduce the demand on our NHS in the years to come. OK, well, that will be in Parliament in the next few days, likely to go through, because Labour's backing you, not necessarily because all Conservatives are signed up. But Victoria Atkins, we're out of time. But thank you very much indeed for being with us on a really significant this morning. Now, that is all we've got time for with Victoria Atkins. But we want to know what you think this morning. You can always get in touch. Email kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk. Or you can send us a message on X or Instagram at BBC Laura K. On this important day, of course, there'll be lots of information and explanation on the BBC website and the BBC News channel all day. Let's return now to our main theme with Labour's Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary. Welcome to the studio. It's always good to have you with us. Does Labour support the UK providing assistance to Israel in this situation?
Well, we strongly condemn this attack by Iran on Israel, this reckless decision at a time when the international community has been urging restraint because everyone's greatest concern has been the potential escalation to a wider regional conflict. So we strongly condemn the action that Iran has taken. It's really important that everyone is working now hard to prevent further escalation. We obviously don't have confirmation yet as to what engagement has taken place from the UK, and I think it's important that we wait to hear that. But clearly, I think it's really important that everything possible is done to prevent the further escalation, as the Prime Minister has said last night.
Can you tell us if Keir Starmer was consulted before UK jets did get involved in this, whatever then happened? Because in this kind of situation, it is quite normal for the opposition leader to be brought on a confidential basis into some of these conversations.
Again, I can't comment at this point on what discussions may or may not have taken place. Look, there are long-standing UK missions in the Middle East that, as you heard from Victoria Atkins, the government minister, are about preventing Daesh activity around Iraq and Syria, and we support those ongoing missions and the immensely professional work of our armed forces. But I think we still need to wait for the further information later today. The thing we do hope and expect to see, we do hope that there will be a statement from the Prime Minister in Parliament tomorrow. I think the seriousness of this, the real concerns about potential escalation mean that we do need to hear from the Prime Minister in Parliament tomorrow.
But are you, as a senior Labour figure, on principle, behind the notion that UK jets should be part of working with other countries to help Israel defend itself in this way?
Well, what is clearly important is that action is taken to prevent the Iranian strikes and the drone strikes taking place. So, because this is about, obviously, Israel's security, which is immensely important, but it's also about the security of Jordan, of Iraq, of other partners across the region, and it is about the stability of the Middle East. Obviously, this is at a time we cannot lose focus on the devastating crisis that is happening too in Gaza. We also have to have the immense diplomatic effort underway now to prevent further escalation taking place.
And nobody wants there to be escalation, of course, but that is quite a clear question of principle, though. Are you, as a Labour senior figure, happy for the UK to participate with other countries in Israel defending itself in this way?
Well, again, we do obviously need to wait for what we hear from the government. But look, let's be clear, we support the existing government missions in the Middle East and continue to do so. That is important. We also think that it is important that action was taken overnight to prevent the Iranian strikes on Israel, because we should be clear, if action hadn't been taken to prevent those strikes, we would have seen further escalation and further risk of widening conflict. But this is the most important thing now. The Prime Minister has rightly talked about that, said that no one wants to see any further bloodshed in the Middle East. But we've also, from the Labour Party, talked, Keir Starmer has talked, David Lammy has talked, Lisa Landy has talked about the importance of preventing wider regional escalation. This is about the security of everybody who lives in all the many different countries across the Middle East, and the risks to them and the international risks of allowing escalation to take place. We know that Iran has a long history of destabilisation attempts in the region through its support for Hezbollah, for Hamas, for other actors across the region, and that's why everyone has been urging, internationally has been urging restraint and working so hard to prevent that further escalation now.
And we're hoping before the end of the programme to speak to a representative of the Israeli government to see what, if anything, they might do next. I'd like just to touch briefly on a couple of other subjects. Our viewers will be very familiar with the row that has been rumbling about your colleague, Angela Rayner. She's been investigated by Greater Manchester Police over whether or not she did the right thing in terms of saying where she was living many years ago. Now, you and other colleagues have always said she did nothing wrong. You're confident of that. But isn't it, however, now time just for her to publish all of the details? Then people can see it, move on.
Well, Angela welcomes the opportunity to be able to set out all of the facts for the police, for HMRC, for the proper authorities, and the hope that that will then just draw a line under all of this, because I think she has done the right thing by taking independent tax and legal advice, and she has been clear throughout this that she has acted in accordance with that advice. Now, look, this is about events that happened, nearly 10 years ago, before Angela became an MP. She has set out information about her family arrangements, and really, I think, look, she is very keen to be able to provide the facts to the appropriate authorities. But actually, all of us need to get on with talking about the real issues that people are concerned about across the country, including issues that Angela has been campaigning so strongly on, like support for working people.
But the problem is today, Yvette Cooper, one of our former advisors, has made it known to the Sunday Times that they've given a statement to the police saying actually her account is not correct, contradicting her claims. Now, she's absolutely said she's confident she did nothing wrong, but surely she could move on from this just by publishing it all today if she's so sure she did nothing wrong.
Well, I think Angela's been very clear. She will provide all of the information, and she's very happy, not just very happy to answer questions from the police or HMRC, but actually she is very keen to, because it allows her to set out all of the facts, not the sort of gossip, not the different allegations that we've had from Conservative MPs. And we understand this is the run-up to local elections. We have seen them do this before, as we saw over the Durham case as well. But, what Angela, as our fantastic deputy leader, would do is to set out those facts for the appropriate authorities, because this is obviously about her family arrangements, her personal finances, and that's really how it should be dealt with instead.
Now, we were going to talk in detail about your plans for confronting violence against women and girls. if you win office. Of course, events in the Middle East have rather taken over that. But I just wondered, in the wake of that terrible event in Bradford, where a mum was killed in broad daylight, do you think as a society that we are taking violence against women and girls seriously enough?
I don't. I think this is an epidemic of violence against women and girls that is simply not being taken seriously enough. I think the government's response has been far too passive. I think there are continued failings across policing and the criminal justice system that nobody is taking sufficient strong action on. We had a young mum killed in broad daylight while she was pushing a pram in Bradford. We had the awful case of Raneem Uda, who called 999 4 times on the night that she was killed and no one came. We've still not seen the full overhaul of police standards that we needed after the murder of Sarah Everard. And that's why Labour is setting out a mission to halve violence against women and girls over 10 years, but also to overhaul the response of policing and the criminal justice system. It ranges from putting domestic abuse specialists in 999 control rooms, overhauling protection orders, specialist action on rape. This is immensely important, but you're right, this is a society-wide issue as well. I don't want to see people desensitised to the same threats to women and girls that we've seen through generations without action being taken.
Okay, a huge job there to do, Yvette Cooper. We'll look forward to having you back and we can talk about those plans in more detail another time. But thank you very much indeed for now on this important morning. Now, let's just remind you what's gone on overnight. Israel has shot down around 300 Iranian drones and missiles with the help of the US and other allies. We've been hearing from the Cabinet Minister Victoria Atkins on what the UK role was in all of this and what might happen next. Bronwyn, you're a foreign policy expert. What did you make of how our politicians are trying to grapple with this in this country?
Well, they've been careful about saying what the UK has done or hasn't done. But in a way, even though we know nothing about what actually the UK military has done, what the UK has clearly done is show support for Israel. And Israel, by saying that British planes are in the sky around there, even if they've fired no shots, is able to claim and demonstrate that support.
And is that something that's unusual? You know, we heard the Minister say, well, actually, it's part of existing operations. But I think a lot of people watching at home might not actually realise that British jets are regularly flying around in the Middle East.
I think that's an important point, that they are doing that, particularly in the skies over Iraq, and that they're maintaining some of the things that Britain has done, some of the more controversial things Britain has done, for example, in Iraq over the years, and trying to maintain stability there.
John, what did you think of what you heard?
I thought that poor Victoria Atkins was put in a difficult position there because no one seems to have told her anything. And she comes on live television and says, well, I can't give a running commentary. And what she really means is, I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Nobody knows what's going on, but she doesn't seem to have been fully briefed. I think the thing about what's happening in the Middle East right now is, obviously, Israel suffered an attack on October the 7th, but the response since has been so brutal, vicious and appalling, and with so many tens of thousands of children in Gaza killed, that the idea that Britain is going to take military action to stand alongside Israel from the consequences that flow from this is very dodgy in my eyes, and I think lots of people will feel that. The idea that we want to take sides in this war terrifies me, I have to say, and I don't feel comfortable with it. I'm very comfortable for us to support Ukraine, and that's very clear, you know, the rights and wrongs of that situation. But in the Middle East and in Israel, it's very different.
Ian?
I think we sort of put this into perspective. The reality is that the RAF have been flying over that area a lot, and they've also been intervening against Iranian surrogates in the Red Sea to try and protect international shipping. The fact is, if a country fires that many drones across the area where they are, Syria and Iraq, it's almost inevitable that you have no idea where they are absolutely directed. Drones are flying very low and they could drop anywhere. You have no particular idea. So I think shooting them down is absolutely rational. It was rational for the Jordanians. I think it's rational for the RAF to do that, that the British government should say yes. Anything you have a view on, you can take into action. We can view it as supporting Israel, but it's actually trying to stop harm and further death. And I think we should remember that the Iranians didn't just fire drones, they fired ballistic missiles at Israel, and Israel dealt with those themselves. So all I would say is it's a little bit more nuanced than people want to make out. The reality is that Iran has been involved in stirring up trouble in that region for some time. The attack by Hamas was planned by Iran, whatever else they say. Hezbollah is backed by them. The attacks on international shipping, backed by Iran. And we should, you raised this question earlier on, I absolutely agree. We should be prescribing the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps. They have 2 banks here in the UK funding a lot of the extremism that takes place now in amongst some of the Islamic community. All of that has to be dealt with. That's the way.
Bronwyn, what you say though, because John's expressing a view, many of our viewers might think actually really uncomfortable about standing alongside Israel in this, but Ian's making the case actually Iran, you know, Iran got what they were asking for in a sense.
Iran has been causing a huge amount of trouble, including backing Hamas in the October 7th attacks. But my concern about British military presence in this is that it does escalate things. It begins to remove the option of responding in other ways, as Ian Duncan Smith was just saying, through sanctions and whatever. It brings immediately a military response to this on Israel's side. That is an escalation. And Israel, it seems to me, could and should have thought perhaps more carefully after October 7th where this military action was going to get to, because it has fallen, I think, into the trap that Hamas wanted of taking such extensive action, causing so many civilian deaths that it is losing the world's support.
OK. John, we'll be talking later about what effect this has on politics here or not. But as someone connected to the Labour Party, I want to ask you, though, about Angela Rayner and about the rumbling row about this. And clearly the Conservatives have been trying to pull strings here and keeping this in the public eye and in the newspapers. And some of the newspapers are very hungry for a story like this. What do you think, though, of how the party's handled it? Because some people on the inside of the party think they could have nipped it in the bud a long time ago if she'd been more proactive at the beginning.
I think this is such a ridiculous non-story. And when we're sitting here and we've got, you know, war in Ukraine, war in the Middle East, and we're talking about something that happened that long ago, something that the police could only prosecute within the first year after it happening. This was in the FT yesterday, that if the police were going to take any action about these alleged financial misdemeanors, that would have had to be in the first year. So everyone in Manchester right now, I hope all the crimes that you've endured have been sorted, because the Manchester police are spending time on this. And Laura, I have to say, for you as a broadcaster, for the BBC here to keep spending time on this and to have Yvette Cooper sit here and come and talk about violence against women and girls, and that to take second place to this bit of gossip that the Mail has pushed and pushed and pushed, and for the BBC to have to say, we have to cover this because the Mail have keep covering it, and so it becomes a story, and it's not a story just because the Mail says it's a story.
I think a lot of viewers would think that Greater Manchester Police aren't exactly a bunch of sort of pussycats who just investigate something because Victoria MP tells them to. But Ian Duncan Smith, I'd like you to respond to this, because he's essentially said this is just the Tories playing fun and games, move on, there's nothing to see. What do you say to that?
I hate all this personal attack stuff myself. I think it ultimately demeans us. But it has to be said that Angela Rayner has pursued other people on almost exactly that. She spends a lot of her time calling on people to resign in advance of any investigation. So, you know, if you're going to play that game, then it's going to come back onto you. I wish we wouldn't do it constantly in politics. I agree, there's many bigger issues to discuss that we won't get round to, but that reality is the case, that were this to be a Conservative that had done this, I'm certain that Angela Rayner would have been called to resign. I wish we'd stop it, but that's what she did.
We're sort of talking about potentially are in completely different universes. You know, Nadeem Zahawi's was his tax affairs were about millions of pounds. This is potentially about, I think, £3,000, which is a lot of money, but completely different.
Well, I think the question really here isn't about the amounts of money, it's about what was your intent. If you are a politician at the end of the day and you decide that, even if before you became a politician, then the best thing to do is to say, this is where it is, all open, and leave it at that. So I just simply say, if we could stop all of this one day, it'd be great. But the reality is, you know, do as you would be done by. And I think that's the case here.
OK, all right. Well, all three of you, thank you very much indeed for such an interesting conversation. And huge events abroad we've been discussing do not stop politics at home. The Green Party broke records last year, and in a few weeks they hope they can do it again and win big in the local elections in England that are coming thick and fast. At the launch of their campaign in Bristol, top of the list was a promise to make it easier for voters to get a roof over their heads that they could afford. The Greens would like hundreds of thousands more council houses and controls on sky-high rents from landlords. Carla Denyer, their co-leader, is here. Welcome to the studio, Carla. It's nice to have you back with us this morning. Now, you kicked off your campaign focusing on housing. Do you accept that building more houses has to be part of the solution?
Yes, absolutely. We are aiming to create 150,000 new council homes a year, and we would do that through a mixture of new build and bringing empty homes back into use, conversions, and making it easier for councils to buy some of their supply off the market. And we think that those measures together are the best way of tackling the housing crisis, which so many are at the sharp end of.
But it's interesting because you've said previously you expect to build no more new homes than in the decade of 2010 to 2019, when most experts actually think not nearly enough was built. So how many homes in total would the Greens like to see built?
So we need to create many more affordable and many more social, so council or housing association homes. And that's going to be from a mixture of building new, and that will be a significant part of it.
But can you tell us how many? Because the sort of accepted figure among experts is often around about 300,000 homes need to be built every year in places where people want to live to help make things easier and hopefully bring prices down. So how many would the Greens commit to?
So the number we're committing to is the 150,000 creating new council homes. That definitely supply, is part of the housing crisis, but just building more homes on its own is not going to tackle the housing crisis, because the problem is that in so many parts of the country, what we're seeing being built is not what people need. So, for example, we see large out-of-town developments of luxury executive homes, 4, 5, 6 bed, double garage, and yet no bus service, no doctors or dentists, no more school places. And to be honest, they're not affordable for most of the people living in that area. So that's not meeting local needs. So numbers are part of it, but we need to make sure that it's the right homes in the right place at the right price to actually tackle the housing crisis.
You can't tell us this morning how many new homes you would actually want to see built.
Our proposals aren't broken down into that level of detail yet. Our manifesto will obviously be coming out closer to the election, but the top line is 150,000 new council homes a year and a suite of measures to enable local councils to do that, building themselves as well as buying off the market and bringing the many empty homes in this country back into use as well.
But our viewers might be a bit confused about your stance on housing, because last year your party won outright control of Mid Suffolk Council, first time they'd done that. I remember we talked to your colleague at that point, but they won that on the basis of a campaign that opposed house building. And right now in Warrington, in Maidstone and in South Oxfordshire, where you've got councillors, they're calling for house building not to happen in their areas. So on the one hand, you're saying, yes, you want there to be more housing. It must be made available for the reasons you've described. But then you can't tell us how many new houses you would actually build. And in some parts of the country, you're saying don't do it at all.
So I'm not sure that it's quite true that in Mid Suffolk the campaign was based on opposing housing.
That was a large part of it.
The campaign was about making sure we have the right kind of homes in the right place at the right price. So it's perfectly legitimate for Green councillors to challenge a housing development that is unaffordable and doesn't meet local need, that isn't even in line with local councils' own planning policies. And so, yes, inevitably, your researchers will be able to find 2 or 3 examples across the whole country, given that we've got Greens on 170 councils across England and Wales now. Of course, your researchers will be able to find a couple of examples where Greens have voted against housing because it doesn't meet local need. But what you will see is where Greens have been in administration, which is in over 10% of councils in England and Wales now, Greens have often led on huge amounts of building new, affordable and low-carbon housing. Like in York, for example, we had the housing portfolio for 4 years, built award-winning low-carbon and affordable housing in that time.
Just briefly, we've spoken a lot this morning about Iran's attacks on Israel. Do you support the UK being involved in helping Israel defend itself?
Well, first of all, I think that the news that we've had overnight is extremely concerning, and the top priority for the UK government has to be seeking de-escalation in this situation as far as possible. I know there'll be a UN Security Council meeting later this morning, and I really hope that that will be the UK government's priority. We've seen news, and I know we'll be receiving more news as the morning progresses on what exactly the nature of the UK involvement has been so far. We don't have all that information yet, as far as I understand. I think, you'll be aware that as Greens, we were calling for a suspension of arms sales to Israel. It's worth noting that the UK provides a pretty small proportion of Israel's total arms. They're a major manufacturer themselves. But given that there is very clear evidence that Israel's been breaking international law, both in Gaza and although this doesn't justify really Iran's response at all, it is worth noting that Israel's attack was on diplomatic premises, which is itself breaking international law.
OK, well, Carla Denyer for the Greens, thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning. It's always great to have you with us in the studio. Well, what Western politicians think and say in response to Iran's attacks really does matter. President Biden, we expect, is gathering G7 leaders together later today after he was briefed about the attacks in the White House Situation Room. A picture of that moment the American government have shared online. A direct attack on Israel by Iran has never happened before. Here you can see the scene in the Israeli Defense Forces war room. Now, I believe we can now join down the line the Jerusalem government spokesman, Avi Hyman. I hope you can hear us, Mr. Hyman. Thank you for being with us this morning. What is Israel proposing to do now after Iran's attacks?
Laura, Israel's woken up to a bittersweet morning. Bitter because after pulling the strings in this war for the last 6 months, after funding its terror proxies in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, and in Yemen, Iran has taken off their mask and attacked us for the first time directly. We thank our strategic allies for standing with us at this difficult time. And we're glad that we were able, it is sweet morning, because we're glad that it didn't end much, much worse. We are prepared for all scenarios, both defensive and offensive. And we won't be broadcasting any plans or anything like that. It is under consideration still.
So the Iranians say that their attack was in retaliation to Israel's attack on their embassy in Syria. Will you admit or explain Israel's role in that?
Well, firstly, I'm not going to speak directly to that strike. What I can tell you definitively is that attack occurred in a place that was not an embassy, that was not a consulate, that was not any kind of diplomatic mission. It was an Al-Quds force military position. The people there were active members of the Iranian Al-Quds force, and they were there, I'm sure, seeking harm on Israel. We will continue to do what we need to do to defend our nation. And again, it would appear that Iran wanted to do some serious damage, and thankfully they didn't. Although one 10-year-old girl is currently fighting for her life, a young 7-year-old Israeli Muslim girl who was hit by shrapnel last night.
You say your response to Iran is still under consideration, and I know that you've made it clear you're not going to tell us exactly what Israel might plan. But will you heed the call we've heard in this studio this morning and from the White House last night, a call for restraint, a call for de-escalation?
Laura, we didn't start this war. We didn't want this war. This is Iranian aggression that we have seen for decades. Iran funding their proxies to attack us. And now, again, they have taken off the mask. There was a time in recent history, in living memory, where Jews could not defend ourselves, where we were defenseless. That is no longer the situation. And again, we are able and willing to defend ourselves, to act defensively and offensively, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies at this difficult time. So the finger should be pointed to Tehran, who started this war, who turned up the volume last night, and we have always sought peace and security for our people in the region, while they have always attempted to engulf the region in war. They are they say that we are the small Satan in their mind and that the West is the great Satan. So we again thank our allies for their support, and we will stand steadfast.
Avi Hyman, thank you so much for joining us this morning from Israel. Thank you for your time. Well, we're joined, as promised, by our international editor, Jeremy Bowen. It's great to have you in the studio with us, Jeremy. A bittersweet moment, it was described by the Israeli spokesperson there. He wouldn't tell us specifically what Israel's response would be, but it's pretty clear from his words that a military response is on the table from the kind of language that he was using. But from your conversations, what do you assess will happen next?
Well, what I've picked up from senior Western diplomatic sources is that, to quote one of them, it's been a long night, now it's time to draw a line under this. That the Israelis, with the help of their allies, have a victory, that Netanyahu is looking stronger at the moment, and please do not, the message is, go ahead and try and perhaps attack Iranian soil, because that really would be another escalation. The Iranians have been signaling very clearly for the last, well, since April the 1st, when that attack took place in Damascus, that they will have to do something about it. They reject the idea, as many people do around the world, that that wasn't a diplomatic compound. I actually know the premises. I passed it many times, not allowed in Damascus, but passed it, and it is very much where their embassy is.
So when Israel says, as we just heard, oh no, that was being used by Al-Quds, that was being used to do damage, to plot things, that it was not a proper diplomatic base, that's spin?
Well, it may well be that, well, the guys certainly were there, of course, and the IRGC is part of the Iranian armed forces, so they would argue that they had their military people in their embassy. It's not exactly unheard of to have senior military officers in a country's embassy. Loads of countries do that. It doesn't necessarily make it into a military target. But I think the point is now, as far as the region is concerned, that the ball is quite in Israel's court, because that is the big fear for the Americans, the Brits, a load of people have had, is escalation. How do you stop that happening?
And what is, do you think, the impact on the conflict in Gaza? Because what you suggested, something really interesting, is that actually Netanyahu might be able to claim something of a win here because the drones and missiles didn't get through, whereas the hostages are still being held, the conflict is still raging in Gaza, and he's under huge pressure from the international community for going too far.
I think this is an excellent morning for Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu is now, the conversation has changed. A few days ago, it was all about the rifts between the Americans and the Israelis and the West, the wider West as well, about the famine caused by Israel's siege, about the conduct of the Israeli army inside Gaza. Now the headlines are asserting the alliance, the coalition. It's interesting, though, that Joe Biden, in his statement, he said, I'd like to summon the G7 for a diplomatic response. Didn't say, wasn't talking about military.
And the impact that that change of tone, remarkable really in a night, might have on the conflict in Gaza?
I think the conflict in Gaza continues. I think the essentials of that don't change. There's a massive humanitarian emergency there, and that, of course, they are trying, the West and is forcing Israel to do more. But as international organizations would say, there is so much to do.
Jeremy, it's great to have you with us in the studio, and thank you for all the times you've come to talk to our viewers in the last few very busy months for you. It's great to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed. Now, it is nearly 10 o'clock. Time has raced by on such an important morning. Earlier, I asked the Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, whether any British planes were involved in shooting down Iranian drones last night. This is what she had to say.
I can confirm that British planes were sent to the region as part of our what's called Operation Shader. That's our anti-Daesh initiative over Iraq and Syria. I'm not in a position at the moment to confirm or deny whether they took part in any of the activity you've just described, but more planes were sent to the region.
Well, let's have a last chat with my trio at the desk. Ian Duncan-Smith, how do you think this will change our politics? You know, we're still in an election year. Is this something that is going to change the tenor of the conversations, do you think?
Well, I agree with Jeremy. I think things have moved a bit. And I think the important thing, which we all want, is an end to the fighting in Gaza, a ceasefire that both sides agree to, and being able to get humanitarian aid in. Now, I don't know whether the UK's involvement with America's involvement and even the Jordanians, allows, therefore, that greater pressure to be brought on the Israeli government to seek that, seriously seek that ceasefire. But a ceasefire, people say, let's have a ceasefire now, only if both parties agree that they will stop fighting, otherwise it becomes a surrender. So you have to have an agreement. But it may just be that there's some scope for the UK and the Americans, I hope, to be able to try and seek a much more likely ceasefire and a release of the hostages.
Bronwyn, can you see that scenario where actually this could help things in a funny kind of way?
If Israel doesn't respond militarily, and I very much hope that that is the case, that it doesn't do that, because then you've really got an escalation. But then we may be in a position when, as Ian Duncan-Smith was saying, countries can put more pressure on Israel and something is done about the humanitarian crisis there. But the big winner from this, or one of the big winners, is Putin, because this takes lots of attention away from the real trouble that Ukraine is in this year.
John, we are still in an election year where there is, if the polls are right, likely to be a very big change politically in this country. But can you see this whole really serious, some people might say existential foreign policy conversation actually changing how the election campaign goes?
I don't think it will, to be honest, unless we see British troops go into action, which I think is very unlikely. I think people are going to be voting on cost of living, on the health service, on schools and hospitals. Those are the things that impact everyday lives, and those are the issues that people are going to be thinking about when they vote in the local elections in May or the general, or whenever that comes.
Gaz has been a tricky vote for the Labour Party.
It has been, and it's quite a divisive issue, and it's something that you may find some Labour activists more reluctant to go out for the Labour Party because of Keir Starmer's unwavering support for Israel. But I think, in fact, when it comes to votes, I think people are going to seek a change in the next government, and they're going to be voting accordingly.
Yeah. This does remind people that defence is a public service, like health and education, and arguably it's the most important thing the state has to do for its people.
And the next time people have the opportunity to make a judgment on that is coming really, really soon. I mean, Ian, the local elections look like they're going to be pretty disastrous for your party. I mean, even you're laughing when I ask you the question.
The assumption, of course. No, I think that defence, I want to come back to this, is important, and I think I'm one of those that believes we do need to make a greater commitment to that rise in defence spending, only if to give a greater lead to the Europeans to do the same. The second part about this, which Bronwyn brought up, which is really, really important, which does affect us, is the Ukrainian war at the moment, where Russia invaded them, has had huge consequences financially for us. The cost of living is hugely caused by that. If you think about that, foreign affairs impact on us. And the reality is, right now, Ukraine is in a desperate situation because what happened was that there was this Hamas, terrible occasion of Hamas, has taken America's focus away from Ukraine, which means Ukraine is likely to have real problems with Russia, and we're going to have further consequences. So these really have big impacts domestically as much as they do have internationally.
We were talking last week with the NATO boss about what he described as an authoritarian alliance of these hostile states around the world working together. But John, just to stick with politics here, because you're somebody who sort of made your name by writing lots of excellent books and also making lots of writing lots of good. Oh well, I was wondering if you were going to do that. But as a long-time Labour activist, how do you see this sort of moment? You know, you've been a stalwart following them for a long time.
I think it's. I think we are going to see a sea change at the next election. There are times in politics, 79, Black Wednesday 92 to 97, when the country just wanted change, and I think we're approaching one of those. I don't want to take the next election for granted, but I do think that people want to see the government changed. Ian Duncan-Smith was talking about, the impact of the cost of living over here of things like Ukraine, but we can't change those. We can't stop them doing that, but we can stop Liz Truss's budget, we can stop Brexit, and those things have impacted us terribly.
All right, well, we didn't have time to talk about Liz Truss's book, which has been making some headlines, but we've had a fascinating, we've had a very interesting conversation with you three here this morning. It's been great to have you with us, and great, of course, to have you with us. Thank you for spending your Sunday morning with us on a very significant day. We've woken up in what might look like a very different world, where after months of raging conflict in the Middle East, a new reality in an old rivalry, Iran has directly attacked Israel, and that may well change the big political and diplomatic game. There could be a nervous wait for Israel's next move, and fears of a wider war are still there. Through the day, of course, my colleagues on the ground in the region and here in the UK will be giving you up-to-date information and trying to explain what's happening. But I will look forward to seeing you next Sunday, same time, same place.